People always ask for something new.
Especially horror fans who are plagued with constant remakes and maybe unnecessary continuations of the classics. Let's just say 2024 has been no different in those regards. If you find yourself looking for an original instant body horror classic, look no further than
The Substance.
Hey everybody, I'm Killjoy Jake, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. Today I want to talk about my new favorite body horror film, The Substance. The film follows Elizabeth Sparkle, an aging starlet who just turned 50 and gets fired from her very 80s looking aerobics instructor show gig. Not being able to handle her apparent fall from grace, Elizabeth tries a black market drug called The Substance, which looks exactly like the serum from Reanimator. I wonder if Herbert West is secretly behind all this. It promises to turn you into a more perfect version of yourself, but what does that really mean? I think The Substance does a really good job at breaking down why beauty standards are so frivolous, while also showing you how a person can get completely wrapped up in it, maybe even addicted, one might say, to achieving an impossible level of perfection.
Would you like to stop? Would you like to stop? Like to stop?
It's very over the top and in your face with its message, but it never forgets to be an entertaining horror film either. This movie is absolutely hilarious at times with some eccentric line deliveries and absurd plot points. The body horror delivers, reinforcing a lot of the film's message with precision. You will not be disappointed by some of the standout effects and, let's just say, goopy moments. It's also an incredibly sad film, which results in the most powerful instances from it. You can certainly have fun with the film during its campy sequences, but they're countered by these truly heartbreaking moments where you see Elizabeth struggle with her own self-image. These scenes in particular are framed to remind you that the substance isn't a solution. It's giving in to the unattainable pressures society puts upon certain individuals. It's far more sinister than the glossy advertisements make it out to be.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
Although a lot of this movie is heightened and very metaphorical, it's also very grounded at times despite being so vague. The message is clear, but it's easy to get lost in a few of this movie's purposefully frustrating scenes, especially considering the way it's shot. The Substance is an entertaining adrenaline shot to the heart of emotions that breaks down a lot of the issues women face in a society dominated by the male gaze. I was really blown away by this one, so today we're going to be doing a little deep dive into The Substance and Coralie Fargo, the writer-director of this one. I want to talk about what inspired this movie and why it's hitting with modern audiences. Be warned, my friends, this is where the spoiler-free review ends. We're getting into some spoilers, baby! Don't just watch this part of the video and don't see the movie. You will miss out. Before Fargo's first feature film, Revenge, released on Shudder, she made a short film called Reality Plus. After watching it, it's clear that The Substance is kind of a more grander and surreal version of the same story. Let me explain. Reality Plus opens with this average dude, Vincent, getting an Elon Musk-esque brain chip installed into the back of his neck. It warps his perception so he and everyone else around him sees him as the model avatar that he creates while looking in the mirror. It features a bunch of parallels to The Substance, like the image of a ripped open back that's been sewn up, a creepy alleyway with a shutter door that our characters must crawl under, and a ton of body dysmorphia. Reality Plus has more of a general dystopian flavor to it, where The Substance feels more of a trippy Hollywood story. Somehow, Reality Plus is also way more French than The Substance, which I didn't think was possible. The biggest difference is the focus being more sci-fi romance rather than pointed body horror. The plot of Reality Plus centers on the relationship between Vincent and Stella. While in his plus form, Vincent goes to a coffee shop and has a little meet cute with the barista. He notices that she also has the chip planted into the back of her neck. He gets her number and they end up going on a little date to a very French nightclub. Vincent's chip malfunctions after an accident at the bar and his true self shows. Everyone he encounters just stares at him as he races home. The next day, Vincent goes to the coffee shop and asks his date for forgiveness for leaving her there. And she accepts. She seems to understand his struggles with the chip as she goes through something similar, having to cancel their next date to the opera for the same reason. Throughout this first half of the short, Vincent has been ogling his neighbor who listens to some crazy metal music while making wicked portraits on her balcony. That one is sick, dude. Oh my god. She doesn't seem to mind though, and even starts up a conversation with Vincent in a later scene. He nervously asks her to go to the opera with him instead, and they clearly have a blast based on the shot of them giggling and going back to their flats. As As they meet again on their balconies, one of her portraits flies off of the table, revealing a drawing of Vincent in his plus form. The twist is, his neighbor has been Stella the whole time. It's nowhere near as sad or disgusting as The Substance, but you can clearly see how Reality Plus was the building blocks to get to the feature about 10 years later. There's also a few things about the short that don't feel as fleshed out. For example, there's a subplot about one of Vincent's co-workers getting some sort of illegal surgery to extend the activation time of Reality Plus, so he can stay in his plus form for a longer time period. It results in a weird, sort of inconsequential nightmare that Vincent has that admittedly showcases the anxiety that comes along with that sort of technology. This aspect works a lot better in The Substance in my opinion because of the body horror elements that are nearly absent from this short. For example, in The Substance, we see Sue extend her week in her more perfect form, which results in Elizabeth's finger turning into what I imagine Gollum's penis to look like. It's clear that The Substance is a more polished version of the story while also feeling more focused with a totally different tone. The entire subplot where Elizabeth tries to go on a date but can't because she doesn't look like Margaret Qualley is clearly a jump from Reality Plus. It's even more effective in the feature because of how sad it is. She keeps trying to leave but feels embarrassed by things she can't control. She adds more layers of clothes despite literally being told by the guy in an earlier scene that he thinks she's the most beautiful girl in the world. It's heartbreaking to see her smear all of that makeup off of her face and let the insecurities she has dominate her potential night out. Now let's start talking a little more about the feature. The film begins with this efficient and artsy way of establishing exposition by showing us Miss Sparkle's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame over the years. First, we see it being cemented into the ground and Elizabeth getting swarmed with paparazzi. As the years pass and cracks start to form on the pavement, less and less people recognize the actress's name. The sequence even ends with some guy dropping his ketchup-covered burger on the star. He doesn't even seem to care like a lot of the other men in this movie. We formally meet Elizabeth Sparkle as she wraps up her ambiguous aerobics show, and she learns from her shallow boss Harvey that she's being replaced. In one of the most poignant scenes from the first act, Harvey explains to Elizabeth that once you hit 50, it just stops. He's referring to typical industry beauty standards, but God, I wish he was talking about changing his disgusting eating habits. There's a lot of gross out moments in this movie, especially in that third act, but oh my God, this scene alone made me want to vom just in the first 10 minutes. I've never been so repulsed by Dennis Quaid, who gives such a terrific villain performance in this movie. This is what I would argue is the catalyst for the entire film. I'm sure some will argue that the unseen manufacturers of The Substance are the real villains of this movie, the voice coming from the phone that sounds exactly like the 5-Gum commercial narrator.
Stimulate your senses.
But to me, it's this disingenuous conversation perpetrated by Harvey here that is the real enemy. What he does to Demi Moore in this scene alone is sickening, and he doesn't even seem to care. He literally escapes the conversation to go talk to some other random guy across the restaurant. You constantly get the feeling that Harvey is in control of this world, especially with this scene where it almost feels like he's laying out an axiomatic rule to the industry. It's so unnerving and sets up a lot of the horror that follows. Dennis Quaid is great, but I would actually go so far as to argue that Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley deserve some Oscar nominations for this one. Fight me, the Academy! Neither actress has really done anything like this before, and they both shine in these dual roles. After activating The Substance, the middle part of this movie flip-flops between the two characters as they go through very different trials and tribulations. Elizabeth spends her week off stress eating, showing signs of an eating disorder, and struggling to cope with her own self-hatred. Sue, however, immediately gets the job to replace Elizabeth, even working around her 1 week on, 1 week off schedule. What's fascinating to me about this scene is that she specifically says she has to take care of her mother every other week. Sue and Elizabeth slowly start to refer to each other as separate entities, even though the voice over the phone is constantly telling them that they are one. It's a gray area with this movie that's never made entirely clear, considering that there's a sequence later on where they actually fight each other. I could care less about logistics with this movie, considering a lot of it is very metaphorical. I think that fight sequence is supposed to represent that inner struggle one might have with the aging process, or maybe even jealousy that an older star might have over the young up-and-comer. That's reinforced later on when Demi Moore is watching an interview she did in her Sue form on a talk show where she degrades Elizabeth and her career. Sue even goes on to say that she never watched Elizabeth Sparkle's show while she was growing up, which gives this movie a whole nother angle to consider. The Substance has just as much to say about fame as it does beauty standards. It's no wonder this film won Best Screenplay at Cannes. Getting into the body horror of this movie, I feel like it's best to start with the way this film frames every scene with Margaret Qualley's Sue.
I'm Sue. Sue.
The biggest criticism I have heard of The Substance is that it's exploitative by showing off way too much TNA throughout its runtime. Now, I'm guessing here, but it's a pretty confident guess to say the least. At least 25% of this movie shows somebody's ass or tits on screen jiggling in front of the camera. There's an argument there to say that that's a little counterintuitive to this film's overall message. It makes me wonder how many dude bros walked out of this one talking about how hot Margaret Qualley is while missing the point entirely. We talked earlier about how this film is shot through the perspective of the male gaze. It's why Dennis Quaid's aptly named Harvey feels like he makes the rules throughout the runtime of this movie. According to him, to make it in the industry, you have to be constantly beautiful. It makes the cinematography purposeful, even if some may walk away from this film feeling like it missed the point it was trying to make. I think this all works because of how carefully crafted The Substance is, however. Demi Moore is stunning at the beginning of this movie, but she lets the bigwigs get in her head. She gets into this terrible car accident without a scratch, and instead of being grateful to be alive, she chases after this potential miracle drug to regain her past self. Later on, when she's changed into the hunchback after abusing the substance for so long, she drags the picture of herself back into the apartment. She misses the way she used to look, and it's all because of that made-up bullshit that Harvey put into her head. While this movie absolutely has some hilarious moments like that bloody ending and certain line deliveries, it's these upsetting moments that hammer its message home. Without that angle, this would still be a very notable body horror film that would make any Cronenberg fan cream their pants, but it's special for the range of emotions it can hit on at the drop of a dime. Man, I knew this one was gonna get weird, but I simply could not have predicted that ending. Having run out of what I think is spinal fluid, Sue can no longer stabilize. She starts to literally fall apart just hours before her big New Year's Eve show and races back to her apartment. She pulls her own teeth out and her ears fall off. It is so hard to watch. Desperately grasping for a solution, she injects herself with the activation formula again, and that's when the monster comes out. She transforms into a fleshy hybrid of both Sue and Elizabeth that woefully tries to put on her dress for the show. She even staples the picture of Elizabeth onto her melted face. It is so goddamn sad and hard to watch, man. Inexplicably, she makes it backstage somehow as the show is just about to start. This movie is very metaphorical and makes some things just make sense. You gotta just roll with those punches to enjoy this one. There's a few things about this final scene I want to note because I think they're just so well done. First of all, there are topless performers here for a broadcast that I believe is about to go live to millions of people. If you had no idea what I meant by this film feeling too French a moment ago, maybe you do now. There's also a little girl in the crowd who I think represents the industry's influence on literally everybody, even outside of performers. The little girl seems excited for this show with beautiful women alongside the pervy shareholders. It's easy to ask why, but again, maybe it's because of those societal standards that even children recognize. It's another terrifying element that this movie captures in a really subtle way. And trust me, not everything is subtle about The Substance, man. Finally, there's Harvey giving another line that details the complicated terror of The Substance. He says that he made Sue this way as she comes on stage looking like an ogre. Again, it is so telling as to what's actually going on here. Thankfully, this villainous D-bag gets covered in a shower of blood for this movie's insane climax. The Elizabeth Sue monster starts to fall apart as she races out of the theater. Not before spraying blood on literally everybody in attendance, though. Carrie, eat your heart out. She falls on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and explodes into pieces. It gives some major The Thing vibes as her meat blob form crawls over to her own star. She dies looking up at the stars in the sky, finally putting an end to her suffering. I don't know what more I could say about the third act of this movie besides warning you to be done with your theater concessions before the end of this film. It is so nasty and over the top. I loved every second of this bizarre movie despite being very repulsed by it at times. The Substance is a true 10 out of 10 masterpiece that is without a doubt my favorite horror film of 2024. It is by far the best feminist body horror movie that I've seen since Julia Ducournau's Titan from just a few years back. I'm dying to watch Fargo's Revenge after seeing how good this was, and yes, I know, I can't believe I missed that one too. I'm literally going to watch it tonight after recording this. I am just enamored to this film, but what do you guys think about The Substance? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Before we wrap up today's video, I want to thank you all for helping me hit 500 subscribers on my gaming channel GullGotha. The next goal is 1,000, so let's try to get there before the end of the year. Go subscribe to GullGotha, and once spooky season is over, I'm going to start uploading there a lot more frequently. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Thank you all again for watching this deep dive, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.